I want to welcome you to the Institute on Governance. I think this is awesome that this group is here. What you may know about us, we are not-for-profit. Although you read all sorts of neat stuff around mission and vision on our website, I like to summarize it as saying we're here because we really want to make government and what government does better, more relevant, and important in the 21st century in order to serve the needs of Canadians. So the kind of work you're doing is tremendously important. In my day, as probably the oldest guy in the room by about 20 years, policy was something that we could develop in-house, and government did. It owned much of the expertise. But here you are exploring some of the policy issues around the Internet of Things, and maybe going to be able to pull together data and information and your intelligence to help government make the kind of right decisions it should be making. So I applaud you. I think it's great you're here. I hope you like our space. We are really quite proud of it, and this is exactly the kind of purpose that it's used, to bring together people who will talk about the issues of the day and then maybe, again, help governments and others make the right policy decisions. So thank you for coming. Have a great session, and I hand it over to Mark, who you know.
Thank you, Toby. Welcome, everyone, to the second multi-stakeholder meeting in the Securing IoT Process for Canada. Before I say too much, I'm going to do the quick housekeeping things. There's a washroom right there, but there's also one up a level, so if you're looking for washrooms there. I notice Wi-Fi credentials on the wall, so please log on and tweet this as much as you want to. Our hashtag is what?
Secure IoT.
Hashtag Secure IoT. I should have known that. I'd like to acknowledge our partners in this year-long process, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority. There's a couple of people from CIRA here today. CIPIC, I think Tamir is here. Yes, he is. Hey, Tamir. Canary, Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, and the Canadian chapter of the Internet Society. In fact, it was Franca who pulled this together for us today. So thank you. In a minute, Andrew Sullivan will put us all to work for the next few hours, but I'd like for all of you to remember that work doesn't finish when we wrap up today at the reception at Open Door. We engage in a lot of intercessional work between multi-stakeholder meetings. We've held a few webinars with different folks to get their input. We have some background research documents that we're putting together from examining policies from around the world on securing IoT and their potential to be used in Canada. We have a project going on right now with a youth group out of Toronto to better understand how to communicate IoT security to young people. But we also have a series of listservs on the topics that we're going to talk about today. And I encourage you to get involved and certainly subscribe to the listservs and make your voice heard there. With that, I think I'll just introduce Andrew Sullivan from Oracle Dyn, and we can kick the day off. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Is this working? Yeah, you can hear me? Good. So I'm Andrew Sullivan, and I'm here because I've been doing various internet things for a while. I used to be the chair of the Internet Architecture Board. I've been involved in the Internet Engineering Task Force for a long time, and I do a lot of this sort of multi-stakeholder stuff, and I'm here to whip you into posting things onto the mailing list. So that's really what this is about. But what we're going to try to do today is to go over some of the things that we did at the last meeting, and try to focus on a couple of them and try to make some progress on it. Right, so the basic idea in any of this sort of thing, I mean, I'm a geek for a living, right? That's what I do. And the basic idea that we always have in building things on the internet is we're gonna take something and we're going to try to make some progress on that. And if we make some progress on that, that's a good thing. And if we don't make any progress on that, then what we do is we give up and we try something else. And you'd be surprised how well this works. I mean, to a large extent, actually, that's what's happened on the internet, right? Which is why most of the software that you use on the internet, you have noticed, right? It's all unfinished. That's because that's what happens. We get the part that we need, and that one's working, and then people move on to something else that seems like an urgent problem. Now, all of the things on this list from before are urgent problems, but I think some of them are more urgent than others. And therefore, what I'm going to try to do is get us focusing on some of those things from last time. So we're going to work for a little while. Who's keeping time for me? Because otherwise I'll just talk forever. Nobody. Okay, good. Excellent. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over these a little bit. We're going to have a break around 2:30. Assuming that, you know, somebody says, hey, shut up, at 2:30. And then we'll resume, I guess, at 3. And we're going to try to establish a couple of working groups to work on specific things here. Now, we've got a proposal to work on a couple of these, but we'll begin here at the beginning talking about these things and sort of decide whether we've got them in the right order, whether they're the right priorities, and so on. And if we've decided that we've got the right priorities, then we can immediately start to work on the specific issues. All right, with that said, we've got 10 items here, 10 items from the last thing. And you all have a copy of this, I think. They're in your in the folders if you don't have them. So we've got this question about creation, use existing privacy and security certification labels for devices. So this is one thing that we were saying, oh, well, we can give devices little labels, and then people can, you know, people who are buying them will be able to make decisions about whether they're a good device for their uses. Then there's the a second part that goes with that, right? And the second part that goes with that is, oh, okay, you've got all these devices, all these labels on them, but you don't know what to do about them. So for instance, right, it's not that useful to me to have a little label on a thing if I don't know what it tells me, if I don't understand what the label portends. Right, because there are lots of labels on my devices. I mean, you know, there are those CSA numbers. You know, you look at the thing and it's got like various sub things that tell you what the particular standard is that it implements. I don't know about all of you, but I don't know every bit of the electrical code, and so I don't always know what those things mean. And what we want, of course, is for these labels to be useful to people somehow. So how do we do those kind of awareness campaigns? And that's a second thing. There is this idea of which standards body could oversee the Internet of Things, or if none exists, we could create one. I would like to suggest very, very strongly that there's already plenty of people working on standards in this area, and if we decide we need to create a new standards body, we have lost our collective mind. So that's a line that I would like to draw in the sand, but you know, feel free to walk over it. At the same time, you know, I think we can have some discussion about that. There is this idea to identify threats and how to use various tools to mitigate those things. You can get the trolls out there and you know, cause some action in the world, which then, you know, causes people to respond to these threats. There's this question about how we're going to use this process to determine the best practices. And I think the particular idea here is that, right, this has got a Canadian focus. So we're not trying to solve the problem of the Internet of Things everywhere in the universe, because there are different problems in, say, Antarctica and here. You know, because there are fewer people in Antarctica, not because they're very cold, because we've got the cold climate. But we've got this question about, you know, what are the conditions under which these things have to work, and I think that that's an important question. We have to determine what the outputs of this process will be. And my suggestion, but again, it's just a suggestion, I'm not the boss of you. My suggestion is that this determinant of the outputs is actually an iterative process. That is, we discover what the outputs will be, and the way we discover those things is we do some work. We deliver an output. That's the way you discover those things. Then there's a bunch of stuff here about testing and evaluating the devices, and in particular, ones that are already shipped. So one of the problems that we're facing, and this is true actually in most standards activities, it's true in most public policy things, and interestingly, it's true in most internet code, is that you're always late. Everything is always late because the stuff has already shipped. if somebody was merely coming along and proposing, right, well, I think that there should be an Internet of Things, everybody would say, yeah, well, we've got problems today that are already in the world, and so we're not going to make policies about those things until you've got an Internet of Things. And then one day you wake up and you realize, oh, dear me, they've shipped these things all over the place. Now what are we going to do? So we actually have to evaluate what's already out there and determine whether there is something that we can do about some of those things. I don't know about all of you, but I have like light switches in my house now that already do these things, and some of them are terrifying to me. I mean, they're terrifying to me partially because I've bought them and installed them specifically so that I can be terrified of them, right? Because I'm testing stuff, because I'm weird that way. But you know, lots of people have this kind of problem, and you want to make sure that we actually respond with reasonable views. There's a question about how to lobby the manufacturers of these things. So this is an actually serious problem, especially in Canada, right? One proposal that that people have floated is that we just, you know, regulate the sale and marketing of the devices in Canada. And I recall a discussion about this last time, and then somebody else pointed out, given that we have like this giant space and fewer people than all of California, the chances that we're going to change the market by simply saying to people, well, we're not going to buy your stuff then, is probably not great. So how are you going to influence them? You've got to give them, what I like to say about the internet, right, is that you got to use only carrots. You don't have any stick. You can't force people to do what you want. And this is an example where we want to bring people along and bring them something that is in it for them so that they get an advantage out of it. There is this idea of rewarding stars, so people who've done a really good job, and how do you do that? So that goes with the previous thing, right? You say, okay, well, here's a carrot. We'll give you an award. Maybe we'll give you an award like because it'll be money in your pocket, or maybe we'll give you an award like free publicity, or there's lots of things. I don't know what they should be, and that's one of the things that we can discuss. And then finally, on our list from last time, we've got this highlighting of use cases and joint solutions and so on. Now, you will notice that I took my jacket off, I rolled up my sleeves and all the rest of that, and that's because we're going to work now. So the idea here is that we've got these 10 things, and I don't know what things people think are really the most important. I don't know what things people want to work on. I have noticed, however, that the lists are very, very quiet. There's not been a lot of discussion of a lot of these things, and we're not going to make any progress unless we pick a few things and start working on them. So we're going to start right now by saying who thinks that these are in the right order, who thinks they're in the wrong order, who thinks that some of these should, you know, become more important, float to the top or whatever. I'm going to open the floor with that. And we even have Tom, who is going to handle the microphone. We are being remotely cast as well, so please wait for the microphone to speak so that other people can hear you. Yes? The microphone is coming. We're pretending to pretend like it's Donahue and it's 1978, right?
Is it on? You can
Yep.
hear me? Okay. Number 8. I'm not saying it's easy.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think in order to make an impact, that needs to go up the priority list.
Okay.
Because ultimately, your effectiveness will be how well you can influence. And it's a whole question of how do you influence and who does it, et cetera. I agree it's difficult, but it needs to move up from my perspective.
Okay. Reactions to that? Uh-huh.
Oh, sorry, no.
No? Oh, okay. No reactions. All right. Over here then.
That was another reaction to that's a new thing.
Okay. So I've got 2 people in queue, over here and then here. Oh, and please also state your name when you start talking. Yep.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut off.
No.
Yeah. So Jordan Melzer. When in our last session we had a topic on network resilience, and I know there hasn't been a lot of traffic on the mailing list, a couple messages, but I think there's been some offline work by a few folks, and I don't know if anybody would be interested in discussing that today or breaking out into a work group on it, but just to have some dedicated time to actually talk.
So this is a good point, actually. The last time we did have a couple of different topics, and for those of you who weren't at the last meeting, we got a bunch of things. We had breakout sessions, and then we got a bunch of different topics, and then we started coming together, and we came together on what things had we built some consensus around. We actually didn't get to the network resilience part. So So you're right, there is this separate question of network resilience and how we're going to work on it. I think what we're trying to do today is chip away at these things, but I'm certainly prepared to be outvoted because this is the multi-stakeholder world and I don't get to say. So if people really want to split and maybe take the later sessions, we could break this into two pieces. Then we could separate off a chunk on the network resilience and concentrate on that as well.
Hi, I'm Kim Hendy. I wanted to look at number 2 and empower consumers through education and public awareness. I just see that the list is very leaning towards the technology, infrastructure, hardcore side, and I think this has been a history of the internet for a long time. I think it's key to educate, make public aware, because that way, if public is aware, there'll be perhaps more women in a room next time when we do one of these things. And I think that it's key to understanding not only the processes, but the labels, as you say, and promote consumption, right?
Mm-hmm. So could you say a little more about what kind of awareness? So one of the things that worries me a little bit is that, for a long period of time, a lot of people were, for instance, aware of the internet, and the awareness amounted to, wow, that's really weird and geeky, and it's scary and frightening, and it's magic. People have said to me on various occasions, so I should tell you all, I studied philosophy, and I got into this that way because it's an obvious transition. And so, people have said to me on a few occasions, well, I don't know how you learned all about that. And I was like, I just read a few things. But it occurred to me that a lot of people felt for many years about the protocols on the internet that they were mysterious and frightening and scary. And so, that's presumably not the kind of awareness we want to create because these are consumer devices. So what sort of awareness do you think we need to make here? What can we do to make this awareness not this giant bucket right now, right? To me, awareness is huge. I want to make this awareness in a particular kind of sense.
Okay, so how many hours do you want me to talk? No,
we only have so much time, and I will note that there's coffee back there.
No. This is an issue that I've researched and is dear to me, and so on and so forth, and I could discuss about it. But basically, as the internet has evolved, and I'm going to talk about from the late 90s,
sure.
The focus of governments and organizations has been an infrastructure and hard programs and tools because it's tangible, it's easy to sell for funding, it's easy to sell for votes. So what has happened is that when the internet was a highway with 2 or 3 lines of cars going, everybody was understanding, the things that were there. And what's happened is that as this highway has been populated, I get in my car and I don't really care to know how it
Sure.
functions and
right.
all that. And this is the internet. I just want to get in my car and turn it on and go know the 5 things that I need to get where I want. So when I get in the car, right, okay, there's an instruction manual, but there's a guy. I don't read the instruction manual. When you buy the car, you say, how do you open the door? What is the trunk? How does my thumb work and all that? So I believe that, I am a person that posits that the multi-stakeholder process could be applied to defining what is going to be the digital literacy of our lives in the future. Because it's not just about technology, it's about understanding the brain process of the thinking of what you can do with technology so it's meaningful. At the same time, you have to be aware and educated of the risks. It doesn't mean that I ain't going to be afraid somebody's going to break in my house, but I need to be aware that if I lock the door, but I was at this conference a day and a half ago, then people are afraid of everything that can happen, so I think that there has to be a multiple stakeholder, a multiple layer, and a multi-prong approach to what the internet, what digital is today. And often people just need to know what they need to know, but the spaces have to be available. I had the fortune of being in the government when it was the process of disseminating access, right? Everybody had to be connected, whatever. And there was a multi-pronged approach at the libraries. There was education and awareness opportunities for what you needed. And sometimes it might just be being aware in this room. If we were to design a model, for example, a prototype, okay, maybe he is an engineer and knows something to do we need a prototype of something, and I don't know it, but I need it for this design. I don't need to know everything he knows. So I think that the issue of digital adoption and digital awareness has not been able to be tackled by the society because it's difficult. And it's who's going to fund it, who is interested, and why I go back to the connectivity. At the time, we were trying to get all our schools connected to people because everybody. Today, it's not that just people are moving away from the government services because Mary Jo that needs to find out how to access, she's afraid to get an infected virus. Her, her browser just uploaded and it's a new screen, and she doesn't know what to do. So the government, the people are going away from the usage. The younger generation doesn't really care about security, but they're the holes in the internet of things where hackers are coming in. And so it's not only the government services that you need to access, but now you go to the airports, you have to check in. The banking is almost like online all the time. So there's many stakeholders that now are interested in a digital literate society. So I believe that there is an opportunity, I would say a challenge and a responsibility for everybody that's looking at new developments, call it a new service from the government or a new process involving, that they include how are we going to tackle awareness and education? How is Mary Jo going to know that the toaster that she just brought, she has to just check to see if it's on or off? While at the same time, we get our industries to say the standard should be off. So what I'm saying is that there has to be an opportunity where it's campaigns, libraries output, schools, education, a multi-stakeholder approach to say, I just bought a toaster, where can I find out how to use it? You know, sort of like, you see how you go to the geek stores and they'll tell you stuff? This is a new reality, and as we move to this, we need to be able to call, I go to my dealer because and now he has a responsibility of educating because the car's now.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so what I've got so far, what we've got is nobody seems to be questioning that the certification stuff should be near the top of this. We've got some suggestion that the empowering consumers needs to remain near the top, and we need to figure out what that is. And we've got the suggestion that we need to move the lobbying of manufacturers way up near the top of this. So these are three things that right now I'm hearing those are our sort of top three contenders. So I don't know if everybody agrees with that. Let's find out. Okay, we've got here, here, and here. Oh, and here.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Andrew. My name is Hossein Badran. I would like to say that I agree that the consumer awareness side needs to be moving to the top. It doesn't mean that other issues will fall behind. They may go in parallel, and some issues are linked together, like labeling has to come after certification, for example. It makes sense. You label once you make sure the features are there. But consumer awareness is key, and it has to go, I believe, with multiple types of messages, depending on one factor is the age of the recipient. Messages to children are different than messages to adults, to professionals, and there is history in this kind of approach. I have been part of the Cisco delegation funding or contributing to the child online protection of the ITU Council Working Group. As you know, several years ago, issues of bullying on the internet, addressing targeting children specifically, became quite a global issue, and countries have done national initiatives. So the ITU made it a mission to try to bring messages across and learn from best practices. I think we can capitalize on this. We just need to, one additional step, what do you have to do about connected devices? Internet, but / connected devices. And I believe, from experience in child online protection, it has been effective. There was a safeguard for children. Parents were engaged, teachers were engaged. So this kind of messaging has a success history we can capitalize on. We don't have to start from scratch. I'm also chairman of the board of a private school, and we see in the computer labs there are messages on internet etiquette, what to use, what to do on the internet, what information to share, what happens if somebody tries to approach you in an uncomfortable way. So we can capitalize on this as well. Regarding adults, I agree with with my colleague, with Kim. Yes, I think messages to adults have to be concise, clear, and simple. Not to go into technology, not to go into protocols, just how to behave the right way to protect yourself. People are not aware about what type of data they're sharing, what impact this data sharing will cause their financial health issues. So this awareness needs to be there. And what I have heard in many fora, that there's a lack of awareness on the consumer side. I know that ISOC has had a very recent initiative to partner with consumer organizations worldwide, so I think this is something we capitalize on. I'm not sure who's the NGO for consumer protection in Canada. We need to approach these. We have the government as well. So I think the consumer side needs to be quite to the top, and hopefully as ISOC with all the stakeholders engaged, we can have an impact.
So you're suggesting really that this empowering thing, what's number 2 here,
Yes.
that needs to be flipped, that it should be number 1.
Yes.
Yep, okay.
Yes, nutshell. Thank you.
So I had here, wait, no, that was not the order. Yeah, it was over here first, and then you. I think I got it. Oh, and I missed you. Sorry. You're here before the fellow in the blue shirt. Right here. No, it's you, I think.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, Rob Davidson. Looking at number 7, I believe it is, how to test and evaluate. That tells me what, but what's the who and why? I mean, what seems to be missing here is a discussion of regulations and a regulatory body and where that fits in particular with the new formation of the cybersecurity group in the federal government. Really, there needs to be an infrastructure in place to start testing this stuff on a big scale. And so where's that financing going to come from to do that?
So I'm assuming that that this is input, that what we're producing is input to government decision making, but we can't necessarily tell governments what they're going to do because we're not a sovereign body.
But isn't there an opportunity to define something that's collaborative, that is across multiple?
You're hitting exactly what I was trying to ask. So are you suggesting therefore that we need actually to add something here? That we need to sort of define the kind of audience to figure out what the target is, or are you saying that you want to move this testing thing, you want to move that priority up?
Well, I think that the testing is part of something bigger.
Okay.
And if it doesn't have a context, then what does it really mean?
Okay.
So it does need to be part of something bigger.
Okay. Now, how was I doing this? I think you're next, Alan.
Sure.
Hi, it's Alan McGilvery. I'd just like to voice my support with what appears to be the consensus of create and use a privacy certification. Like certification would for me be probably first, and certainly consumer empowerment, public education. Since we're not choosing one, I'm not going to debate what the order would be. I also like the idea of moving up what's called how to lobby manufacturers of IoT devices. I know these were outputs of our last meeting, but I think it would serve us well if we changed 8 to say how to engage vendors of IoT devices.
I see what you're saying, yep.
Right. In other words, the people that actually manufacture the Apple products are not Apple, and the people
Right.
that manufacture the Google products are not Google. And also engage, I think, is a little more collaborative as opposed to lobby. And third, I just like to comment on this gentleman, what the gentleman said here. There are lots of certification systems around the world that don't involve government at all. So it's not a foregone conclusion that if we had if we had standards, a certification system, that there would necessarily be any government involvement beyond the ordinary government support for ISO work. But I'm not talking about a body that would somehow regulate the adherence to those rules. So I don't think we should rule that out altogether, but I think going down the road of government regulation from the get-go is probably get us into trouble. And there's a lot of work to be done around certification and public education in any event. So I think that should be what our focus should be. Thanks.
All right. And next to you is next, I believe.
Chris Parsons. I'm from the Citizen Lab. I just wanted to point to the value of 7, actually. So this is how to test and evaluate devices at scale. So at the lab, one of the things we do is we do rip apart software. We rip apart devices occasionally. And it's time-consuming, hard, and really challenging to do. But it's only when you do that that you get ground truth as to what the world actually looks like right now. It's often a boutique operation right now. And figuring out how to scale that up, I think, is critical, because when you can do that, you can start figuring out, like, well, what should a privacy and security certification label be? Well, until we know what the problems are, it's difficult to say, here's what they should be, and here's how we evaluate passing, middle, or failing, or whatever it looks like. There's different ways of doing it. There's different groups that can do it. Consumer groups have come up previously. Consumer Reports in the US actually has this as part of their mandate to build out a digital standard. But I just want to identify that it's really important to figure out what the world looks like today, because what we want to do is identify, respond to today, as well as address tomorrow. And if we're sort of guessing what today is to project what the future may be, it seems like a bit of building on quicksand.
So there's something really interesting that I just want to draw out of what you just said, because you read this item completely differently than I did. What I did, right, I've got my propeller head hat on, so naturally what I did is I concentrated on the test and evaluate part of that sentence, and you concentrated immediately on the scale part. That what I was concerned with, like I wasn't too convinced actually that a group of multi-stakeholder people should make up rules about how to test stuff and everything, because quite frankly, it's the tester who's going to make that decision. But your point was rather, oh yeah, well, like I know how to test things, but it's me and 3 other people, and what I want to know is like how 10 million devices are going to get tested. And that's actually a really good point, that only collaboratively can you come up with how you're going to do the scale part. So that's an excellent point. Thank you. Next, I believe we were over here. Well, we're going to go over here just because of the room circulation. So there, and then at the back, and the fellow in the blue shirt. And have I missed anybody?
And we have some people online as well.
Oh, good. Okay. So we'll do that after we get back here.
Hi, my name is Dave Dupuy. I'm with Innovation Science Economic Development. I'm with a small group and Consumer Affairs. I missed your first meeting, but I was made aware of this group, and I was quite interested in topic number 2, empowering consumers through education. While we're not experts in our office on IoT, we have a vast understanding of the consumer protection framework, and the one thing that jumps out at us quite clearly is just how many different areas are captured by the IoT. So when you start talking about how do you educate consumers, I think some of the best reports we have looking at the full range of consumers issues was put out in 2016 and 17 by Consumers at International. So I'm glad to hear that ISOC has partnered up with them. I think some key things that we can draw from Consumers International work is, well, everyone always talks about privacy and security, and those obviously are very important issues. They also highlight a number of issues that have more to do with functionality, and that's how do you help consumers understand so that their expectations when they buy these devices meet. So you think about the interoperability of devices, or you think about limitations that may be caused by contract terms or digital rights management, or who's liable when something goes wrong, or where do you go when something goes wrong. We did a quick search for what education exists out there right now, and what we found is there's actually a lot of really good information. If you go to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, they've got some pretty good privacy tips specific to IoT and some specific to wearable devices. Public Safety has a Get Cyber Secure campaign going on, and internationally there are also some really good examples, but it's just scattered everywhere. And there's no one single place where you can get this type of information. And basically, I suppose if there is a working group put together on the consumer education piece, we would be interested in contributing to that, because right now we just have a lot of questions. Do you want to focus just on privacy, just on security, or do you actually want to look at the full range of what consumers should know before they buy it to ensure that they're happy with their device throughout the whole stage?
And by you, we mean we, right?
Yeah. Yes. And the idea too, like, do you want to target specific types of devices? Do you want to target specific types of consumers, like, old people versus young people? And I mean, in a multi-stakeholder process, what I hope might be possible is not trying to develop education from scratch, but seeing what is the best information that's already out there, and how can we perhaps consolidate it, simplify it, and maybe even make it more effective. Instead of, here are the 19 checklists that you need to read through before you buy this $10 device. Maybe if there was one video that sort of, I don't have all the answer. I have a lot of questions, so I'm really, if there's a working group put together, I would be very happy to participate and actually see it drilled down to, if education is on the table, then how can we drill down to something, because right now with the listserv, it's hard to contribute without knowing what specifically we're going to be doing. You don't know how to contribute to it.
So I think this is a good point, but one of the things that I'm hearing here pretty strongly is you're proposing some work items for a charter for a working group in this area. The first of which is take the stuff that's already out there and put it together in one place so it's easy to access. And that sounds to me like a great charter item for a working group. So thank you. I think that's a great way to start. You feel like I've just given you work, don't you? Well, you're right.
I mean, another thing you could consider as well is you do need the people with the expertise to evaluate just how anyone can put information up on a website, but it also needs to be evaluated and vetted. So you would need some sort of process to do that as well. But right. I mean, as a starting point, if education is the key, to me, I do think let's start with what is already there and how can we make it more effective and bring it together.
Right. Good. So I have two people at the back, and then we're going to go to online. And is there anybody else waiting? Okay.
Thank you. Tracy Lorio from Carleton University. At the last multi-stakeholder consultation, one item that maybe it's in here, but I can't quite see it, was yes, consumer protection, but how do you deal with the aggregate assemblage of all of these things, or how do you deal with it when you're in a context of a smart city, or if you're thinking of Sidewalk Toronto, for instance. This morning I just came from a meeting where, on a research project led by Pamela Robinson at Ryerson, and we looked at the 230 smart city applications to Infrastructure Canada, and what we saw very, very clearly, depending on the scale of the city and the location and the community, a general ignorance of the application of technology and and these at the city level. And so how do we deal with the public sector? How do we deal with the public aggregation of large technological systems that are going to be deployed? And consumer protection doesn't necessarily cover that. It also doesn't cover some of the bigger issues that we had discussed last time, which was mission creep, the potential for these things to be turned into surveillance, digital rights management. How do you upgrade your city? How do you upgrade your house? How do you maintain all of that stuff? So there would seem to me, and again, maybe it's in here, but I don't quite see it right now. How do you deal with those pieces that are happening right now where there's quite substantial funding going into these areas and there's little or no resources at that scale to help those kinds of actors to deal with more aggregate issues as opposed to just the consumer protection piece of it. And of course I would support the consolidation of research and those kinds of things as well. And this also applies in a precision agriculture environment for rural areas. Mm-hmm. And so what we saw in the 230 was rural areas, small communities, Aboriginal communities, very little knowledge, but we also saw that in some of the big cities that didn't get shortlisted, that it was just kind of a tick box activity with a very clearly a lack of demonstrable understanding of the kinds of technologies that are going to be deployed at a large systems level. So I would hope that what we saw at the last multi-stakeholder meeting that you held in Ottawa would show up in here somewhere as a priority item, or it gets added into one of these somewhere.
So I think what you see, you'll notice that it says including, and we were trying to restrict ourselves to only 10 items on the thing so that we could come down to like 3 things that we could walk out of this room to work on. But it sounds like what you're arguing is that there's a sort of aggregation piece of this that is cutting across it, that is missing from this, and you think that that's a more important priority than some of the other ones that are listed here. So now the question that I'm going to have for you is, do you think that that's more important than the top 3 that we seem to be converging towards?
I would see it would be a top 4.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to replace the 3, or it's consumer and aggregate protection, and then we get into the aggregate in that particular kind of context. Sorry,
I see.
I'm already
Okay.
loud as it is. Yeah.
Well, so there is I mean, there are 2 ways to look at this, right? One has to do with the way that the aggregation affects individuals, and I think that that's covered in the consumer side here in some sense. Well, let me finish the other half, and then you'll see what I'm saying. There's the other piece of it, which is the sort of emergent property of the total aggregation of all of the things, and that is definitely missing on this list. I agree with you that well, to put it maybe a little more crudely, the sort of big 5 internet companies today have not only a great deal of knowledge that they can infer about you individually, even though they're not necessarily getting it out of disclosures from you, but also they've got sort of large-scale knowledge about everyone and the sort of group consequences of that. And the first one, you could argue, is somehow covered by consumer protection or something like that, although at the moment maybe the rules don't work very well for that. But you can at least argue it's in the topic. But the second one, the sort of aggregate control over the culture, is not here, and maybe you're arguing that that's a different topic that needs to be included somehow. Is that fair?
Yes, except that consumer and citizen or resident are very different things.
Yeah. So
right?
I grant
so
you
to me,
yeah.
that point I think needs to be pretty clear.
Right.
Because as a citizen, as our institutions are perhaps the consumer of these large systems, I, at the end, I'm not behaving like a consumer when I'm
Right.
dealing with my city and I'm interacting with these devices and then these larger kind of public issues
Right.
that are at the intersection of that. So I think we're sort of there, but I think citizen, resident is key. It's different than consumer. And then the second part, I absolutely agree with you.
So I think there's an important thread that I want to mark it and then move on from this. But and that is the way that the developers or vendors, as we were pointed out earlier, make stand in relation to the consumers of this thing. That doesn't mean customers, but rather the people who are consuming the thing, is in a producer-consumer sort of relationship. But your point is partially that as the producer of this thing is more and more ubiquitous, that is, it's in the walls and so on, it's very hard to regard the person just happening to walk by as a consumer in the traditional sense, because they're not making a choice. So there's no choice of engaging with the thing. Yeah. Okay. So that's good. There's one more before we go there. The fellow in the blue shirt here. So you're on the list, and I had somebody else, and you're on the list too. Okay.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm Terry Ansari, and I was thinking about item 7, and I really believe that the at-scale piece, when we talked in the first meeting, is really the operative phrase there. When we had that conversation, at scale was central to the dialogue, and I believe that if we don't consider it literally at the top or a 3A kind of conversation, everything else kind of will ripple from the results of that. In other words, there's proof there. And in the absence of proof, we're going to get what we kind of got in some of the sessions on Tuesday at the Digital Access Day with the Internet Society, which was a lot of fear. And if you try to teach people by fear, they just blank out, and that's a real risk. But if I can show something at scale that's an aggregation conversation that also deals with awareness, deals with engagement, I have a different opportunity to actually say, and it's more than Canadian, it transcends boundaries, because then it's something we're contributing back to the entire community, and I think there's real value in really considering that as a tangible opportunity as opposed to a a policy-driven or an awareness kind of minded construct.
So are you suggesting that the testing at scale needs to move up, or are you rather saying that this at-scale principle needs to cut through all of these other priorities that we're setting?
I think I'd like to see the testing move up to itself, but I take your point that it is cross-cutting. A lot of what we're talking about here is curation and obviously aggregation. I mean, these are things that we can do very well. Having the convening ability to bring the story together is really vital and really important. If we don't put a there, though, we'll end up with this sort of soupy thing. So that's why I'd say I'd suggest strongly that we find some way to hone in on that and make it stick, or at least make it something that is Canadian, that could be not just exported but also embraced by others and maybe built out that way.
Okay, so we're going to go online, and then I have here, 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 and there. Right? Did I miss anyone? You're off now?
No, I'm on. Sorry.
No, you're right after the people online.
I have one comment from Faud Khan, and he says he wants to mention that CSA Group has created a program to address the certification problem. It's called the CVP Cybersecurity Verification Program, and it's currently being piloted. The goal is to make this a Canadian standard later this year and then target international groups after that. And it would be in ISO and IEC. So he'd like the group to kind of figure out how that can be used as a part of this process also.
So this goes partially to this question of three here about which standards bodies and so on, and that suggests to us, right, that we don't need to create another standards body, which is a great relief to me. Okay, let's come here for next.
I'll wait patiently.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom. Thanks. My name's Tamir. I'm just trying to think of if there's a way to consolidate a little, and I hope this doesn't break anything, but I'll just put it out there and people can say what they think. Particularly, I was thinking of engaging with manufacturers, whether that could be consolidated into either, the whatever strategic intervention is thought of when trying to address, what an accurate certification mechanism looks like, but also as a way of, if they're willing to engage, of addressing some of the testing and evaluation issues up front. So like again, like this is going to be, if they're not willing to engage, then we're not going to be able, it's not going to work. But if they're willing to feed into the process and give, like, if we're looking at addressing specific problems and they're willing to provide some information about those specific problems, that might be one way to address that up front, not at scale, but probably in a more targeted way. So there would have to be some scoping around that. But if that was possible, that might be one way of like addressing that. Another way is actually like of potentially consolidating that one as well as the testing and evaluation one might be to consider whether the certification mechanism, I know that this is an issue with certification mechanisms because it actually deters certification sometimes, but include some sort of testing and evaluation into the certification mechanism. The other consolidation thought I had was to Tracy's point on there could be two streams of consumer education, one that is very targeted around like consumer to device interactions and what kind of thoughts and considerations should go into that, and one into there is another consumer relation, and it was kind of discussed at the first meeting, but I don't think anyone came up with a good idea of how to work it in because it's very difficult. But it really is kind of what we were talking about, which is consumer to government, but the government is then the customer, or the city is the customer, or whatever. But like how to like provide public education that can not, we don't want to scare people, but like provide for authoritative and informed debate around that, and that might be a useful thread in there, or at least for a working group that's looking at how to educate consumers might look at whether there's like a room to have two education threads there. I think that's all I had. The last thing I was just coming off, if there is an actual CSA standard that's being worked on that's looking specifically in IoT, one thing might be to consider whether it might make sense to provide strategic input into that or not. But yeah, anyways, those are all the consolidation thoughts I had. I don't know if any of those are helpful or if they just kind of break everything we've been going on until now.
I don't think so. I think in particular that what that suggests is that we want to concentrate on getting some working groups going so that we can make some real progress on this and try to figure out, like, for each working group. Because what we're going to do this afternoon, I'm telling you, I swear I'm going to make you all do this, is people are going to get together and they're going to work out, sort of pieces of a charter. And we're going to put those to the mailing list and we're going to say, here's this working group and they're going to work on these things. And those of you who are going to be there, I'm going to take your names, so you're going to work on them. And that way we can, we can have some concrete things that we can start to propose. And I think one of the things we have to do at that point is sort of say, what are we going to do first? Because, right, this is almost an right? It's internet and things. Okay, well, that's like all the stuff in the universe. So we're going to have to start with something and cut this off one piece at a time. So I think that that's one of the pieces that we're going to try to do in the next step. What time are we?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Okay, so we got half an hour for this bit yet, and I have 1, 2, 3. Oh, you're going to go to shot. So that's not a hand. You're just pointing it. I see. That's good. Okay, good. Okay, so yes, Jacques.
Jacques Lato, here, yeah. So the question I had is the definition of IoT, because based on the discussion we've had so far, I heard IoT as being an individual device, a bunch of devices, an application that IoT is part of, a system, a smart city, and the entire internet.
Well, it's not the last thing.
And then if we do security, and then if we want to do security of these different components, well, there's different framework and different application for all of them. And if we're not in sync on what we're talking about for IoT, then there's a risk that whatever the discussion are not going to be focused entirely on what we want to do. So what's the definition of IoT?
So I have two responses that I want to give to that before I throw this open to everybody else. My first response is IoT has ever been and always will be a marketing term rather than an actually useful definite description, because the point of it really is that it's, I mean, from the point of view of a nerd like me, right? The IoT is just sensors and actuators that you've hooked up to the internet somehow. And if that's a boring description to you, I can see why. But the other thing that I would say about it is, of course, to me, the internet is a network of networks. But the internet to, say, my mother is not that. It's the weird thing where she goes on and she turns it on. And the internet to my nephew and niece is the world in which they live. So I think that these are terms that are going to end up being extraordinarily flexible. But I take your point, and that is any working group is working on a particular issue is going to have to bound very carefully precisely which issue they're working on at any given time. Because if you want to talk, and I think this goes exactly to the point that we were, the little discussion we were having earlier about the distinction between the consumer of a device, the consumer of an embedded thing that's in the wall as you walk by, and the consumer of an embedded thing in the sidewalk, which you literally cannot avoid. That's now part of your environment, and it's very hard to think of you as a consumer under those circumstances. So those are different kinds of environments. So I think that that's a really important point that we need to make over and over again. I bet we'll have to make it at least a dozen more times. So I think you were next.
This last little piece of yours was a perfect segue. I wanted to bring forth the elements of discussion of my colleague and of the gentleman there in mentioning that when I look at number 2 and how to empower, the words that resonate to me is empower, public education and awareness. And the issue that consumer is there is like a semantic something to indicate a human being, basically. So for me, it's the education and awareness of every human being, because the education and awareness, not awareness, but the education of the stuff or the robots is somebody else is taking care of that. So coming back to that and the consumer name, that's why I like to talk about digital literacy and the users and the citizens, because we are all consumers of pacemaker, of the traffic lights, of the something in the smart city. So we're all consumers of stuff that sometimes we choose or not. And so that is like, for a semantic word, just for me means a citizen, a person. And so the awareness and education and the empowerment, for me a big word is empowerment, is, let's say, of people, call it whatever you want. And so when you're talking about it's a different awareness, no, it's the same. It's the same, it's not the same piece, but the concept of developing some type of multi-stakeholder approach to tackle the issues of developing digital literacy of whatever it is for the people and at all levels in this age, empowering through education and awareness, I think it's key.
So I agree with you, but I want to push back a little bit about this idea that it's just the same. Because it seems to me, for instance, that when I'm choosing whether I'm going to buy a dishwasher that is connected to the internet, and also whether I'm going to turn that feature on, versus whether I'm going to, like, say, live in the city of Toronto, those are a different scale. And one of them has very much more agency, right? I get to choose that thing. Whereas if my neighborhood is wired, particularly if I'm already living there, it's maybe a little different in the case of the Sidewalk Labs case, because you could decide, no, I just want to avoid that neighborhood. Going to be hard. It's a lot of the city, but that's one of the things you have to. You could maybe make a decision. But I live in a part of the city that is being wired in a different way, and that is being wired whether I like it or not. And I already live there. And I can't afford to sell my house, so like I'm sort of stuck with it. And that sort of suggests that there's a difference that I think is an important one we ought to attend to, right?
What I'm trying to say is that in both cases, awareness and education are important for your understanding and to empower you to do whatever. Choose the whatever it is at the moment. It's not that I'm saying it's the same awareness and education, but I'm saying the issue of you being aware, now it's wired like this, blah, 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 blah. The issue of you being aware that now the washing machine, if you this, and this. So this, what I'm saying is that the content of being aware and being educated is a component that is required across the board. It's not the same. You know what I mean?
Yep.
We're saying the same thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Or anyway, similar enough that it's good enough. All right, I'm not seeing anybody right now who desperately wants to say something. Going twice? All right, good. So, what I've heard here is now I've got sort of a top four, and that's going to be tough if we're going to limit ourselves to three things. So we're going to have to make some choices. So what I've got, one thing that's interesting to me is that very few people seemed to disagree with the idea that this creation of labeling and so on for consumers, a kind of awareness campaign that requires sort of designations of these things. Nobody seemed to think that that's controversial, and in fact many people seemed to think that that was number one, but nobody wanted to talk about it. So that's a very interesting point, because maybe that means it's not number one, or maybe it means that it's so easy that we could just knock it out this afternoon, right? Yeah. So that was the first one that's already here. We had this how to empower consumers through education and public awareness campaigns, and some people seem to think that ought to go first or second, but I mean it seemed to stick in our top three. We had this point about how we're going to engage with the vendors of these things, the way to engage them, and people wanted to move that up. They wanted to move it somewhere near the top here because engaging with them seemed to be a necessary condition for getting any of the other stuff to work. Like, for instance, not going to be very useful to have this complicated, labeling system if no vendor will put it on their box. That's going to be very, very useless. And as I suggested at the beginning, the answer is probably not for us to say, not going to do it. And then finally, I had this idea that the testing and evaluation at scale, and in particular the scale stuff, needed to move near the top. And then the question was whether that scale piece was cutting across everything or whether it was something that needed to be considered independently. So those are the top four that I've got right now from this discussion, and how people are going to cut it off. So we've got somebody here, 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 and here. So let's just go across the room. And did I miss anybody? No? Okay. Unless that's a hand. Nope? Okay.
So before you label, you do need to know what the label, not what it means to somebody, but also what you have to do to get there. I realize there is some work in progress on that. I'm not sure that, I think it's important to continue work towards better practices in the first place. And so as item number 5, I would like to keep a work group on network resiliency and those sorts of topics alive in some forum.
Yeah, so, and I actually really liked the recommendation from Tamir was that basically 7 and 8, testing and lobbying or engaging vendors is part of number 1, because you would want to include that as part of any certification system that you're either, whether or not you're evaluating an existing one or creating a new one, you would want to see whether or not there is some kind of capability for testing and that it is something that vendors are willing to engage with. The network resilience, which I also support maintaining, is just the 3rd.
Look at that. We just got down to, we went from 4 to 3, and we added a topic. That is some good alchemy. So I think you're 5th, because I've still got 2 more here, here and here. Yeah.
Thank you. So I just like to comment a bit on this testing and testing to scale. We all bring our own frame to this when we come to this. There is an interaction, I think, between what the standard would be and what the testing would be. So for example, there's a scenario under which the standard is only that the device be upgradable. Okay, so if that's what the standard is, then the testing required to determine compliance is very simple. All right, if the standard is much more complex, getting into researching, embedding, coding, obviously the testing is going to be much more complicated. So I just wanted to make that point, but also too, having a simple or a complex standard, they're not mutually exclusive. Rather, you could have certain devices, if it has this function, have a simple standard, or a more complex, important, sensors on traffic lights or something, may have a more sophisticated standard and hence testing. So, but I'd always seen where we were is trying to kind of start small, and this is where the use of the word scale gets a little complicated depending on how you're using it. Yes, we want to be mindful is if we went for a simple standard, is it scalable? If we succeed, actually we want to keep that in mind. And so that's one concept of scale. The other word concept I wanted to put out is there are existing standards and certification systems which actually do not require testing of all the devices, but rather it's what they call type approval. In other words, one example is tested if it meets the standard, the vendor is allowed to say that all of them meet that. So scale may not be an issue if that's the way you're looking at it. So I'd want to stay away from the scale until we've got the simpler world figured out. Thank you.
So we have one more here, and then you. Nope.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to support.
Oh, and just remind people, because the remote people won't know who you are if you don't say your name.
Okay.
Thanks.
My name is Hossein Badran. I just wanted to support the idea that the testing and evaluation is linked to the labeling task, so they could be very well in one direction. The scale is certainly an issue, and back in the many years ago, there was the ATM forum or the Frame Relay forum, the multi-service forum, where basically they put together interoperability documentation that shows how multi-vendor environment can coexist, and they have specific testing scenarios for these interoperability specifications. So that could be an approach, but of course this is a very intensive undertaking and requires significant commitment from vendors to set the specification and then to adopt it in their products. I think this is a very huge undertaking. But the type approval, I agree, it's a simpler approach, and as being used, for example, for wireless devices, make sure that the power rating is below harmful limits. So this could be an issue, could be an approach. So before we go into exactly what we tested, I agree, need to see what the specifications look like, what factor characters needs to be verified, but the testing and labeling, I think, need to go together. And the infrastructure part, certainly an issue. Coming from a technical background, technology always exists to solve any specific problems. Once you identify what the problem is, so you can find technical solution, network architecture that conforms. We just need to be mindful of the cost, not to be inhibitive we're talking the average consumer, not to inhibit him from adopting such a solution. Thank you.
Okay. So I have Kim next.
Thanks, Kim Hendy. I was just wondering in number 8, I wasn't here for the first discussion, but how to engage vendors. That could also be part of the education and public awareness. You definitely want to engage the vendors. So I'm not sure what was the original view of this, but we've already engaged the vendors, I think, in the first. So I would also see to engage vendors in the education and awareness.
So here, and then here, and here.
Tracy Lorio. So back to my original point, I wonder if that one point could be consumer, public sector procurement and deployment in public space, public education. Maybe that could be a nice consolidation of those.
Paul wants to talk and he's here.
Oh.
My original point, I wonder if one point could be public sector procurement and deployment.
There's a big delay because what I'm seeing on the screen is not what I am.
So you mute your stuff and talk.
Okay.
You're on.
All right. This comes back to the, hopefully you can hear me okay. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Comes back to the labeling. So just some background on the whole CSA kind of approach on this, just for education, because I think it's very relevant to the topic that everyone's talking about on certification and labeling. So CSA, as you know, a very well recognized organization who does a lot of certification, electrical certification testing and evaluation. So they've come up with like a cybersecurity verification process. It's 3-pronged. So basically what it starts with is a self-assessment to a vendor organization. And so that company goes through this typically at the request of a customer. And they complete self-assessment questionnaire. It's about 100 or just under 200 questions. So once they complete that, then that goes for an assessment by CSA staff. At which point they make a determination if the company is viable to actually go to phase 2, which is an audit. So whatever that company claims on that questionnaire actually will then be verified by CSA technicians. Now, if they go through that process and that also is graded to an acceptable level, and they do have gradings for this, by the way, for maturity levels, then they will continue to do what's called a penetration test and other testing. So they will test like the radios, they will test interoperability, they will test a formal like security testing as well. And so that whole area then results into a certification. And so they will basically, not right now because they're working on this, but the goal is to make this a Canadian standard. And then once they do that, then they're in the position to actually put a label on it and provide you with what's called an attestation letter to the vendor. And so that vendor can then use that across the country to anyone else who basically says, we've gone through a formal evaluation process. So I think that's their, or a key way for organizations to show that they have all of those requirements. The other piece I will add is it doesn't just look at the product. It looks at the company, it looks at how they develop, And I think this comes back to a point that Alan had indicated is, once you show the company has the proper processes in place, you can basically make the assumption that any product that they develop is going to be secure, it's going to be private, it's going to interoperable, it's going to be resilient, and all those other aspects of like trustworthiness. So I think that is key, and why this program right now is being evaluated by quite a few different product companies, and some of these companies are really big name companies that are under the program right now. We're looking to do this evaluation, and it's really being driven by the utility companies in the country. So I think it's really, really important to kind of just look at this. It's one piece, but I think it's an important piece that needs to be considered. And I think the awareness piece is there as well, because they're really trying to get out there and make the industry aware, not only at the consumer level, but at the business level. What do they need to look at when they're evaluating, considering a solution? So thank you very much.
So this is going to be hard because there's such a long delay. What I'm going to suggest that we do is we need to think about whether this is a certification and labeling piece that can effectively replace the multi-stakeholder one, and we can just say somebody's already doing this, we're going to use their thing, and it could be that what needs to happen is an evaluation of that, whether it's appropriate for our purposes or whether what we're talking about is a different set of things that we're trying to communicate, right? Because there is a distinction between, for instance, just having the CSA sticker on the back, which is what your insurance company tells you have to have, versus deciding, oh, well, is this appropriate for my use, right? And what I do when I put, say, an electrical appliance in the wall, I just trust my electrician to know that they're following the code, and the building code has all of these things in it. So I don't, I'm not literally making a choice at that point, because I've just really delegated the choice to somebody who's got a certification. But on the internet, that's much harder to do because there are no internet police, unlike building police. And so that's a distinction that maybe we're going to need to think about. So that would be something that I would suggest people who are interested in working on this in the working group, that would be one of the questions that we need to answer. Walter.
Yes, it's Walter. If I look at all of this activity here and have to go back and figure out, like, what is the ultimate output of this whole effort and what are the stakeholders? And in my mind, there's like three broad camps, but they're they depend on each other. So like, think of a triangle, right? At one point you have the individual, it could be a citizen, consumer, whatever, someone that's either forced into or chooses IoT environment. Another corner is the IoT, we call it manufacturers, but more broadly, provider. You could call it vendor, but provider. It could be product, could be service, whatever. And then on the other, third point on that triangle is regulators, right? And so all that to say is that I think that the service provider and influencing them, understanding their needs and them understanding the objectives and kind of the guidelines that we set forward needs to be at the top, along with the certification and the public awareness.
Okay, so right now, what I see we have are 5 minutes. And so what we've got now is a proposal for effectively 3 working groups, right? And one of them is about this labeling stuff, which encompasses necessarily how you're going to test these things, what the testing looks like, and so on. And also how you're going to engage with the vendors or providers, if you like, in order to get them to agree to this sort of thing. So that was one that I heard. A second one was the sort of design and promulgation of the education and awareness campaigns, a sort of digital literacy. We've had that as well. And of course, one of the questions for that working group is who it is that their target's going to be, and for what kinds of things. So what sorts of problems are you going to tackle initially, and so on. So that was a second thing. And then the third thing was the network resilience. How are we going to protect the network itself from these things, and how are we going to protect these things from the network? I think that those were the top three that seem to have emerged from this discussion so far. So that's what I'm going to propose that people think about a little bit while you have coffee and snacks and so on, unless somebody really wants to object to my description of what I've heard as the emerging consensus here. I'm seeing no objections, and I can't tell whether that's because you're all dying for coffee or because you actually agree with me. Okay. Okay. So that's right. We're not gonna hum, but so let's break for half an hour, and we'll come back about 3 o'clock. It's 28 past or something right now, right? So we'll come back about 3 o'clock, and we can figure out who's going to do what. Thank you.